I think teachers really messed it up when they said you're not always going to have a calculator in your pocket. They should have said you're always going to have a Game Boy in your pocket, and you're going to want to develop games, so this is why you need to learn math. Today we're going to talk about math in GB Studio, and these are really game changers for me for two of my games. One, General Warfare, where I was generating a lot of random numbers and adding up scores. And the second, which I haven't talked about too much yet, is called Judgment, where you're a detective, and I was using the math functions to add up a intuition variable for the player as they found different clues. So I want to present this today. It really enhanced my games, and it's not too hard to understand once you figure out where everything is. So there's 5 main topics listed on GBstudio.dev for the math functions, and they're listed here. Those are an if math expression, loop while math expression, seed random number generator, and evaluate math expression and math function. So we'll go through each of these and some of the functions that are the same within them, as well as some other functions that relate to these 5 things. So number 1 is if math expression, definition listed here, conditionally execute part of the script if the specified math expression evaluates to true. So the inputs you'll need is a certain math function or math equation that you want to use, either using numbers or variables that you have stored. And then you're going to need what happens if it's true and what happens if it's false. So I don't use this too much, but it could be used most likely maybe in a turn-based battle type of game to indicate a critical hit or something like that. You might want to use if math expression. So to my knowledge, you could also piecemeal this together with the if statement and then use math function. So this may just be a more efficient way to have that happen. Next is loop while math expression. So the definition is run part of the script in a loop until an expression is true, or while an expression is true. So those are 2 different things. But anyway, I don't use this too much either, but I could see if you wanted something to happen while the player is picking up different items or something like that, where you are wanting something to happen until they pick up those items, and you're using math functions to keep track of the variable in the background. You could use loop while math expression. Seed random number generator. Place this to run in response to user input to ensure random numbers change between playthroughs. Alright guys, this is really important, so I'm going to jump right into the example so you can see exactly why it needs to be implemented. So this is the seed random number generator example that I have in a game I'm working on, which is an adaptation of General Warfare. So what it is this is the main screen, and when you click on this shootout trigger here, I have 4 different shootout scenes I want to go to, and I want to make it random. So how I'm doing that is using a random number between 1 and 4 as a variable. So that's shoot red black. The operation is set to random value between 1 and 4. Too easy. That's a math function. We already covered that. So then I have just if statements. If that variable equals 1, we're going to end up on this screen. If that variable equals 2, we'll end up on this screen here. So the seed random number generator just ensures that that does not follow the same pattern every time we play. So that happened to me when I was developing General Warfare. It just kept showing the same cards. They were random, but they were the same cards in the same sequence. So seed random number generator makes sure that sequence is randomized as well. The next 2 are quite similar. They are math function and evaluate math expression. So for evaluate math expression, set a variable to the result of evaluating a math expression. Okay, we're using the terms in the definition, but basically that is a more complicated formula, or it can be a more complicated formula than math function. So the best way I can think to use this, or I have used it, is to add 2 different variables or subtract 2 different variables to make another variable. So I'll show you that in GBstudio now. Math function. And the way I'm using that is you can actually add up variables to create a new variable. So that's how I've been using it. I'm sure you could do that with math function, but I think this is just a quicker way to get there. So I'm using evaluate math expression here. So what I'm doing is this, within this battle, the player took damage and the enemy took damage, which is shown here, but I'm actually subtracting those to get a score for player 2. So all the math expression is this is a new variable, and I'm setting it equal to the damage that the player took, or the damage to the opponent and damage to the player. If you get a positive score, that means you won. So then I'm displaying that variable, and I'm comparing it to see who won the battle. So that's evaluate math expression. Math functions allows you to perform various math functions on a variable to add, subtract, multiply, divide, modulus a value, variable, or random number. So that's the more simplistic one we were talking about. It allows you to do these things to a variable. There's many different settings in there where you could probably get it to show up with whatever you wanted, but like I said, the previous one, evaluate math expression, you can actually type in a formula that will take your variables into account. This one's more simplistic. So related to this is increment and decrement, which we'll talk about once we get into GBstudio, but one thing to consider is specifically decrement will go negative when maybe you don't want it to. So let's hop over to GBstudio. So this screen is the main screen for the Game Boy game and the card game. So all I want players to do is to click these when they score or lose battles or lose victories. So the score will be displayed here, and these buttons just raise it and lower it. So first we'll talk about the plus. I decided to use increment here because it's quicker. Increment wins by 1. Very easy. And play a sound effect. So that's a quick way. Instead of doing math function, add value 1, you can use increment. You can also use decrement. However, I don't want this to go below 0 because it's going to mess up my tile switching in my presentation. So for this one, that is actually a math function. And the reason is you can click this box right here, clamp value between 0 and 225. So I'm never going to get to 225. I'm only going up to 14 here, especially with the tile switching. So I use that to make sure that you can't go below 0. So math function's super easy, probably a cornerstone thing to do in GBstudio. So we'll do insert event before. You can type in math function. So like I said, there's a lot you can do in here. So we're gonna just use local 0 operation. You can add, subtract, multiply, divide, and modulus, which I've never used. So let's, in this case, let's just do subtract. And then you can also do, this is for setting it to, but you could also do in other functions like set variable to true or false. But you can subtract a variable, a value, or a random number. So to do what we need to do here, we would want it to do that and click clamp between 0 and 225. So the quicker way is decrement, but like I said, you can, that will just keep subtracting unless you add in another code. So that's just the different ways I use it. And that's the relation between math functions and increment and decrement.